Hi everyone, it's Vicky here, and in this tutorial we're going to learn how to freeze a bird. I'm going to cover how to create a geometry to emit particles from, emit particles using Emit Lava tool, freeze particles using Cool It in Object tool, create ice textures, and finally set the camera, light, and render the scene. Before we start, let's save the project. If you copied the project from a different computer, you might want to set the project first. So let's just cancel that. And let's go to File, Set Project, and navigate to the project folder. And usually you would select the saved scene file, but we don't have it yet, so cancel that. And now let's save the scene. So File, set the scene, save the scene, and call it Freeze01. Without further ado, let's create a geometry. And let's call it Bird Emitter. This is going to be the geometry from which particles are going to be emitted, so we'll need to animate it just a little bit. So let's dive in the geometry node and upload our bird model. So it should be in the geo folder. Hit accept. And it's a bit too small, so we're going to change that with a transform node. So let's create transform, highlight it, and change the uniform scale to about 50. Now we're going to add some more details to the mesh. We can do that by using a subdivide node. So let's create that, highlight it, and now create null and call it bird. Now drop down a box and transform SOP, highlight it, and press the pink flag on the bird now to see both geometries at the same time. We're going to change the uniform scale on the transform node so that the box covers the bird fully. Now let's create null and call it box. Let's drop down another transform SOP and move the box so that it intersects with the bird just a little bit. You can manipulate the transformation by pressing middle mouse button and moving left and right. So we're transforming the box in a z-axis. It's going to be easier in a right viewport. So let's move the box to about 5.9. Now let's create a boolean and leave the settings as they are and create another boolean. Okay, and wire it up to the null, bird null. And we're also going to wire up the first boolean to transform node. Disable visibility on all of other nodes and just highlight the second boolean. And now we can see this small part of the bird. That's the part with which the box intersects. So let's create null and call it bird emitter. Alright, so now if we scroll the timeline, nothing changes. So we have to animate the box over time, so that on the last frame we can see the whole bird. In other words, we're going to animate the progression of the ice effect. So let's highlight transform and let's set a keyframe on the first frame. Then move to the 50th frame and change the value to 0. We have auto key on, so it set the keyframe automatically. Highlight the bird emitter null only, and here is our animated geometry. Dive up one level And we're going to change the view to perspective again. And now we're going to create the particles. So we could use just emit particle fluid, but we need a hot viscous fluid to freeze it later on. So if we use this tool, we would have to set everything manually. So we're going to use Emit Lava instead. So let's look at the side effects website to learn something about the tool. So the tool will set up a simulation to generate a stream of lava. It also applies a lava shader, which we don't actually want because we're creating ice, so I'll show you later how to delete it. To use the tool, we first need to create a geometry to be converted to lava. We've done that already, that's the bird emitter geo. Then click the tool, and we can also select a fluid object to emit lava into, but we're not going to use that. So let's go back to Houdini. Click Emit Lava tool. And we've got some nice instructions on the bottom of the screen. So let's select the bird emitter geo and hit enter. And now we can also select fluid object, but we don't need that. So let's hit enter again. And here we have our particles. Houdini created several nodes for us in the bird emitter geo and connected them to the bird emitter null. So dive up one level, and here we have some more new things. So AutoDop network, where you can adjust all the particle properties and add forces to the simulation, and particle fluid geometry. So this is where the data we need for rendering is. So we can hide the bird emitter geo for now. And we can still see the particles because they are assigned to the particle fluid geometry. Alright, so let's play the simulation. So we've got plenty of particles, but they don't look like a bird or ice yet. So let's go back to the first frame. And we're going to change the voxel size to add some more details to the particles. So let's change that under settings and division size, and let's change it to 0.04. And it looks much smoother, but we still need to tell the particles not to go outside the geometry. So let's change that in edge location. So change it to 0.04 as well. And now when we scroll the timeline, we can see that we have much more detail on the bird. So let's go back to the object level. And we're going to change a few more things. So dive in the AutoDop network, lay out the nodes by pressing L and H. And we can get rid of the gravity force for a moment to see the particles better. So let's play the sim again. Okay, that looks much better, but we still don't have so much details. This is because the particle separation is too high, but we can change that in the flip fluid object node. We won't do it now though, because it would make our simulation time much longer. So the bird looks quite good, but it would be nice to add some more details and to show the areas where we want the icicles to be created. So let's go to the bird emitter geometry. Let's display bird null. And select subdivide node and choose points and then the move tool, and we can use the soft radius. And first we're going to change the subdivide depth to 2, which I actually forgot to do. So I have this edit node already created, but I'll delete it. And now we can move the particles, the points, so that they look like icicles a bit. Okay, once you're happy with the result, let's go back to the object level. And now we're going to create a geometry the particles are going to collide with. Let's just display our out surface null. Okay. And now we can put the gravity back on its place. And we're going to change the force value to -14 and -14. Let's save the scene, and we're going to play the sim again. Alright, now let's create a collision geo. So create a geometry and call it bird collide. Okay, dive in the bird emitter and copy everything up to bird null. Go back to the bird collide, delete the file, and paste everything we just copied. We can delete the edit node, we don't need it, and highlight the bird null. Dive up one level, select bird collide geo, and click static object tool from the collisions tab. Now we can see those extra nodes here. So display the VDB null. The voxel size is definitely too big, so let's change that in collision source under volume. Let's change that to 0.02. Or maybe something bigger like 0.04. Let's try 0.01. Okay, we can see the beak now, so that's much better. Go back to object level and hide bird collide and play the simulation again. We can see some icicles already, and the particles don't fall straight away, which is good, but we still need some more details. So let's stop the sim. Okay, go back to the first frame and go to Autodop network. And we're going to add some jitter seed, so go to Flip Fluid Object and change jitter seed to 1 and the jitter scale to 2. And we're also going to enable the surface tension, so in Flip Solver let's tick enable surface tension and change it to 0. Go back to the object level and we're going to create a geometry within which the particles are going to freeze. So drop down a geo and call it cool geo. Dive in, delete the file and create a box. Drop down transform sub and highlight it and change the value to uniform scale value to 7.5. Let's go back to the object level, highlight the bird emitter geo and highlight and hide particle fluid for now. Okay, go back. Let's choose ghost other objects option and move the box in z-axis to about 6.3. Make sure the box doesn't intersect with the bird. Okay. And drop down null and call it cool. Okay. And now we can highlight the particles again and hide the bird emitter. And we're going to use Cool Within Object tool on our cool geometry. What it does, it just turns an object into a source of cooling when the particles pass through. So in short, all the particles reached by this box change their state from liquid to more or less solid. So let's look at the side effects website again. So all we need to do is to select, the object to be the cooling source. This is our cool geometry. Then click the tool and select the hot fluid to be cooled, so this is the lava. So let's do that. Click the tool, select the cool geo and hit enter. And now we're going to select the fluid object. So inside Auto.network, this is our flip fluid object. And hit enter again. And we have a new node. It's responsible for cooling the particles. And the same in the cool geo. We've got some new nodes created by default. The box changed and looks like a fog now. So this is the area where the particles change their state. Let's play the simulation now. All the particles are white, so they didn't change. This is because they're not frozen yet. But when we move the box to about 5.2 in the axis, okay, and play the simulation now, we can see those black particles. Those are the frozen particles. So let's go to cold geo and move the box back to 6.5. Okay, and now it's a good time to change the particle separation. So in the Auto.network, let's change the particle separation to about 0.01. And we're also going to change the particle radius scale. So let's change that to 0.7. And finally, we're going to change the viscosity to 1.5. Okay, let's see how it looks now. So all we need to do now is animate the box so that it reaches the particles when we're happy with their shape. So let's play the sim, and on the 5th frame, we have a nice icicle, so let's set a keyframe here. Okay, go back 1 frame. Set 1 more keyframe. And then on the 5th frame, we have to move the box so that it covers the particles. It's working very slowly because we have the particles displayed. So let's hide the other objects. All right. And now let's move the box. So move it to about 5.6 in the axis. Okay, and now we're doing exactly the same thing for the rest of the particles. I'm using this little script to control the gravity and liquid emission, but you can achieve the same result by just setting keyframes on frame 37 and 38 and changing the values from 1 to 0. Alright, so now let's create the textures. We've got almost everything ready to start creating the textures. This is a frozen person from Witcher intro, and I'm going to use this effect as a reference for the bird texture. Let's disable visibility on the particle fluid, and we're going to start by preparing 2 separate geometries so that we can apply 2 different textures on the bird. So let's create geometry and call it bird normal. Go to the bird emitter geometry, and we're going to copy everything up to bird emitter null. So Ctrl C or Command C. And now let's go back to the bird normal geometry. And delete the file, and we're going to paste everything in here. So we can delete both edit nodes. And let's see what happens now. So this is the part of the bird model from which particles were emitted. This is the same part we're going to apply the frozen texture to. But let's create the not frozen part as well. So let's create a boolean and connect it to the bird null. When we play it now, it's going to look exactly the same as the other null, so let's change the operation to subtract b minus a. Alright, now we've got two parts of the bird. So let's call this the first one frozen out. And let's create another null and call it normal out. Since we're in the bird normal geometry, let's enable visibility on the normal out null. Let's go back to object level and copy the geometry. Okay, rename it to bird frozen. Go inside and enable visibility on the frozen out null. Now when we scroll the timeline, we can see the bird divided into two parts. One is the frozen one, covered by ice, and one is the normal bird. Now let's set up some lights. So we're going to use the environment light, and we're going to use an HDRI image for the environment map. So let's click this icon here and let's open Winter Forest image. Okay, now when we go to the perspective view, we can see our image in the background. Let's create another light. So let's choose distant light from Lights and Cameras tab and hit enter. Let's rotate it so that it lights up the top part of the bird. And finally, let's create a camera. So click New Camera and click this little padlock icon to move it. Move the camera to the position you'd like to see while rendering, and once you're happy, click the lock again. Let's go to the render view, choose the camera to be rendered and hit render. Alright, we can stop the render and let's go back to the scene view. Hide the bird frozen geometry and go to the frame where we can see bird normal geo. Go to material palette and drag the skin material to the window to the right and then to the bird geometry. Let's change the color to something more brown. Okay, now let's go back to the object level, hide bird normal, and show bird frozen. Let's look for oxidized steel and drag it to our bird. Let's enable visibility on both of the bird geometries. And let's see how the render looks. Now let's go to frame 45 so that we can see only the frozen geometry, and let's adjust the settings. So we're going to change the base color to something more bluish. So those are the numbers that worked for me, but you can choose some different blue color if you want. Let's change index of refraction to 1 and roughness to 0.8. Anisotropy to 0.065. And now we're going to change the reflectivity to 0. And add some code, so change code to 1. And code roughness to 0.34. Let's change the transparency to 0.1. And finally, the emission color to more navy blue. Alright, now let's apply some textures. So we're going to be using ice base color for the base color. So let's go to Textures tab and click Use Texture and find our ice base color image. Hit Accept. And now for the roughness, let's use ice roughness image. And for the metallic, we're going to use ice metallic. And now let's add some bump map. So let's go to bumps and normals, tick enable and change texture type to bump. Upload our ice bump texture and change the effect scale to something like 0.008. Alright, now let's do the same for the code. Upload the texture and change the effect scale to something less, so for example 0.03. Let's just change the tint intensity. So in our Textures tab, under base color, let's change tint intensity to 0.4. And last more thing, let's go back to the object level and we're going to change the distant light intensity to about 5 and environment light intensity to 1.5. And this is the final effect. Now let's create the ice material. For the ice texture, I had to do some research. So here are 3 images that I chose as the best reference for the ice. Let's go to the first frame and display the particles, simulate a few frames and pause. Let's go to Material Palette and browse for tinted glass material. This is the material that we're going to use for ice. Drag it to the material window and to our particles. Now let's render the scene. It doesn't look like ice, so let's go back to the object level and go to the particle fluid. Those are 3 nodes that create the lava color depending on the temperature of the fluid, some from white through red to black. So let's delete those 3 nodes. Okay, and make sure you've got the render null displayed. Let's render again. Okay, now it's starting to look a bit more like ice. So let's tweak the material a bit. Let's change the base color to almost white and a bit bluish. Alright, and we're going to check the IOR for ice, so it's 1.309. So let's change the IOR to 1.309 and the roughness to 0.01. Let's change the transparency to something like 0.92 and the transmission color to pale blue. Next, we're going to add some subsurface scattering. So this is how the light transports through the surface of the ice. So let's change that to 0.02 and the distance to about 0.2. Oh, I think we can even push the value of subsurface to 0.03. Let's change the color again to pale blue. And finally, we're going to add some sheen. So change the sheen to 1 and sheen tint to 0.2. And here is our ice material. And finally, we're going to animate the camera and set the rendering. So let's click the lock to move the camera and move it to the position where the bird is in center, and click the lock again. Create null and parent it to the camera. Now when you change the rotation of the null, the camera is rotating and is still pointing at the bird. So in our first frame, let's set a keyframe. So right-click on the rotation and set keyframe. And let's go to frame 45, rotate the null, and we have a keyframe set automatically. Now, let's go to Out, and we're going to set a basic render. So change frame range to render frame range. And by default, it is set to render our scene frame range, so from 1 to 60. If you want to change that, right-click on the start end and delete channels. Now you can choose your own frame range. So let's put 1 to 20. You can select the camera to be rendered here, and here you can choose the folder where we want all the images frames to be saved. And now it's important, let's call the file some name, then $f.png. Otherwise, Houdini would render only one frame. And now we're ready to render. Just save the scene and click render to disk in background. And this is the end of my tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it.